You know, I never thought I'd say this, but a pie literally saved my life. Not in that dramatic, choking on something in someone Heimlich's you way. No, this was a slow-motion rescue that started in my grandmother's kitchen 3 years after my type 2 diabetes diagnosis. I was struggling, really struggling, with giving up the desserts I'd loved my entire life. The doctor's words kept echoing, cut the sugar or cut years off your life. But my grandmother, who'd lived with diabetes for over 30 years, just smiled when I told her this and said, "Honey, I haven't given up pie in all these years. Why should you start now?" I still remember that doctor's office. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, that antiseptic smell that seems to cling to your clothes hours after you've left. My A1C was 8.7. Significantly elevated, the doctor said, not looking up from his clipboard. He rattled off statistics and complications, so fast I could barely process them. Neuropathy, retinopathy, heart disease. It was like he was speaking another language, but the message was clear: change or suffer. I nodded along, pretending I was totally fine with giving up pasta, bread, and what hurt the most, dessert. I come from a family where love is expressed through food. My earliest memories are standing on a chair in my grandmother's kitchen, helping her roll out pie dough, the flour creating clouds around us as we laughed. Dessert wasn't just food, it was connection, celebration, comfort. For the next 3 years, I tried to be good. I'd show up at family gatherings and watch everyone else enjoy my grandmother's famous apple pie, her chocolate cake, her peach cobbler. I'd take a sad little sugar-free pudding cup out of my purse and pretend it was just as satisfying. It wasn't. And slowly I started to cheat. A small slice here. A just this once there. My blood sugar readings told the story my mouth wouldn't admit. I was failing at this diabetes thing. It was Thanksgiving when everything changed. I was helping Grandma in the kitchen, watching her make her legendary pies: apple, pumpkin, and pecan, the holy trinity of Thanksgiving desserts in our family. I was already calculating how I'd manage to steal a sliver without anyone noticing when she handed me a separate pie, still warm from the oven. "This one's for you," she said. "It's the same recipe I've been using for myself for 30 years. I looked at her, confused. "But you always eat the regular pie with everyone." "Else," she laughed. "Honey, do you really think I'd survive 3 decades with diabetes if I was eating all that sugar? I've been making myself special versions of everything since my diagnosis. I just never made a big deal about it." I was stunned. All these years, I thought Grandma was somehow immune to the effects of sugar, blessed with some magical metabolism that let her enjoy sweets without consequences. But she'd been quietly adapting, innovating, finding ways to keep tradition alive while taking care of her health. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She patted my hand. "Because you weren't ready to hear it. You needed to come to terms with your diagnosis in your own time. And now you're ready to learn." That afternoon, after the dishes were cleared and the rest of the family was in a food coma watching football, Grandma pulled out a worn, stained notebook. The cover simply read my recipes in her elegant, slanted handwriting. But when she opened it, I saw that each recipe had 2 versions, the original and what she called the special version. "This notebook contains 50 years of our family history," she said. "And 30 years of my experiments in making diabetic-friendly desserts that actually taste good." She flipped through pages of pies, cakes, cookies, and puddings. each adaptation noted with precise measurements, observations, and sometimes amusing failures. This one, she pointed to a crossed-out chocolate cake recipe, made your grandfather ask if we were out of sugar. And this one, she indicated a lemon bar recipe, your cousin Tommy spit out at his 5th birthday party. But for every failure, I found a success. The notebook was a treasure trove of diabetic-friendly baking wisdom, but it wasn't just about substituting artificial sweeteners for sugar. Grandma's approach was more sophisticated, more intuitive. The secret isn't just reducing sugar, she explained. It's understanding what sugar does in a recipe and finding other ways to achieve the same result. Sometimes it's adding more cinnamon or vanilla to boost flavor. Sometimes it's using naturally sweet ingredients like certain fruits. And sometimes, yes, it's using a little bit of real sugar alongside alternatives, because a little of the real thing is better than a lot of the fake stuff. What amazed me most was how my grandmother, with no formal nutrition education, had intuitively discovered principles that modern diabetic nutrition experts now recommend. She'd been practicing sugar reduction rather than sugar elimination decades before it became a mainstream approach. Dessert isn't just about sweetness, she told me. It's about texture, mouthfeel, aroma, and satisfaction. If you focus only on making something sweet without sugar, you'll end up with something that reminds you of what you're missing. But if you create something delicious that stands on its own merits, you won't miss the sugar nearly as much. She explained how she'd gradually reduced the sugar in family recipes over years, sometimes by as much as 75%, without anyone noticing. She discovered that certain desserts, like pumpkin pie, needed very little added sugar because the spices provided so much flavor. Others, like fruit-based desserts, could rely on the natural sweetness of ripe fruit, enhanced with a touch of honey or maple syrup, which affect blood sugar differently than refined sugar. I've been testing my blood sugar after desserts for 30 years, she said. I know exactly how much of what kinds of sweeteners my body can handle. And I've learned that a small portion of a really satisfying dessert works better for me than a large portion of something that's just okay. The pie she'd made me that Thanksgiving was her special apple pie. Looking at it, you'd never know it was different from the traditional version. The crust was golden and flaky, the filling bubbling with cinnamon-scented apples. When I took my first bite, I nearly cried. "This is incredible," I said, mouth still full. "How is this diabetic-friendly?" she smiled. The crust uses a mixture of almond flour and regular flour, which lowers the carbs and adds protein. The filling uses Honeycrisp apples, which are naturally sweeter, so I can use less added sweetener. I use a combination of a small amount of real sugar and monk fruit sweetener, plus extra cinnamon, nutmeg, and a touch of maple extract. The secret ingredient is a pinch of salt, which enhances sweetness without adding any sugar. I took another bite, savoring the complexity of flavors. It wasn't exactly like her traditional apple pie. It was different, but equally delicious in its own right. The problem with most diabetic desserts, Grandma continued, is they're trying to perfectly mimic regular desserts with artificial ingredients. That's a losing battle. Instead, I create new versions that honor the spirit of the original but stand on their own merits. After dinner, I checked my blood sugar, expecting to see a spike despite Grandma's assurances. To my shock, the reading was only slightly elevated, nothing like what I'd experience after a regular slice of pie. That was the moment everything changed for me. The moment I realized I didn't have to choose between managing my diabetes and enjoying food. I just needed to be smarter about how I approached it. Over the next few months, I became Grandma's apprentice. Every Sunday, I'd drive to her house and we'd bake together. She shared her core principles for creating diabetic-friendly desserts that don't taste like compromise. First, reduce sugar gradually. Your taste buds adapt, she explained. Something that tastes not sweet enough today will taste perfectly sweet in a few weeks if you give your palate time to adjust. Second, enhance flavors with spices and extracts. Cinnamon, vanilla, almond extract, citrus zest. These add complexity and perceived sweetness without affecting blood sugar. Third, combine sweeteners strategically. A small amount of real sugar or honey, alongside a non-nutritive sweetener, often tastes better than using only alternative sweeteners. The natural sweetener provides the familiar flavor and mouthfeel, while the alternative sweetener boosts the sweetness without. The full glycemic impact. Fourth, focus on portion control. A small slice of something wonderful is better than a large serving of something mediocre, was her mantra. She taught me to make individual desserts, or to pre-slice larger ones into appropriate portions before serving. Fifth, add protein and healthy fats. Incorporating nuts, seeds, or nut flours into desserts slows down digestion and reduces the glycemic impact. Plus, they add flavor and texture. Sixth, embrace fruit as nature's candy. Berries, in particular, are lower in sugar than many other fruits while being high in fiber and antioxidants. Grandma's berry-based desserts were some of her most successful creations. And finally, test and learn. Everyone's body responds differently, she reminded me. What works for me might not work exactly the same for you. Pay attention to how different desserts affect your blood sugar and adjust accordingly. As I mastered Grandma's techniques, something unexpected happened. Friends and family members, even those without diabetes, started requesting my desserts over traditional versions. My cousin, who had always sworn by her ultra-sweet pecan pie, asked for my recipe after tasting my adapted version. "It's more flavorful," she said. "You can actually taste the pecans instead of just the sugar." I started bringing my desserts to office potlucks, where colleagues would express disbelief when I told them these treats were diabetic friendly. "But they taste too good," was the common refrain. That's when I realized what Grandma had created wasn't just a collection of recipes for people with dietary restrictions. It was a better approach to dessert, period. I began photographing our baking sessions and documenting the recipes we made. I started a small blog, mainly for myself, to keep track of what worked and what didn't. To my surprise, the blog gained followers, first a few dozen, then hundreds, then thousands. People with diabetes, yes, but also people with other dietary concerns, parents looking to reduce sugar in their children's diets, and foodies interested in desserts where the flavors shone through instead of being masked by excessive sweetness. What started as a personal health journey became something much larger. I began to understand that the diabetes epidemic in our country is, in many ways, a symptom of our broken relationship with food. We've been conditioned to crave extreme sweetness, to view dessert as a sugar delivery system rather than a balanced, flavorful part of our culinary heritage. Grandma's approach wasn't just about making desserts that wouldn't spike blood sugar. It was about returning to a more traditional understanding of what dessert could be. In many older cookbooks and in cuisines around the world, desserts aren't the sugar bombs we've come to expect in modern American dining. They're more balanced, more nuanced, and often more satisfying. I discovered that many of Grandma's techniques aligned perfectly with historical baking methods from eras before refined sugar was cheap and plentiful. She'd intuitively found her way back to a more traditional approach to sweetness, one that our bodies are better equipped to handle. As my understanding deepened, so did my commitment to sharing these principles. I expanded my blog into a YouTube channel, demonstrating the techniques Grandma had taught me. The comment section filled with stories similar to mine, people who thought their diagnosis meant the end of enjoying food, who found hope in these recipes. Last year, on my grandmother's 85th birthday, I presented her with a published cookbook featuring her recipes and wisdom. We'd spent months testing and retesting each recipe, ensuring they were accessible to home bakers of all skill levels. The book included not just recipes, but the principles behind them, the science of how different sweeteners affect blood sugar, and personal stories from both of us about our diabetes journeys. At the book launch, a woman approached us with tears in her eyes. Her teenage daughter had been recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and was struggling with feelings of deprivation and difference from her peers. "Your book made her feel like she can still have a normal life," the woman told us. "She made your chocolate birthday cake for her friends, and none of them knew it was a diabetic recipe." For the first time since her diagnosis, she felt normal. Grandma squeezed my hand as we listened. Later, she told me, "This is why I kept baking all these years. Not just for the food, but for what it represents: continuity, adaptation, resilience. Life goes on, and it can still be sweet, just in different ways than we might have expected." Today, 3 years after that transformative Thanksgiving, my life looks completely different. My A1C is a healthy 5.6. I've lost 35 pounds without feeling deprived. I actually enjoy a wider variety of foods now than I did before my diagnosis, because I've learned to appreciate subtle flavors and textures I used to mask with sugar and simple carbs. But the biggest change isn't physical. It's in my relationship with food and with my health. I no longer view my diabetes as a curse that's robbed me of pleasure. Instead, I see it as the catalyst that led me to a deeper understanding of food, cooking, and my body's needs. The ripple effects have spread throughout my life. My better understanding of nutrition has improved how I approach all meals, not just desserts. My increased energy has enabled me to start exercising regularly. My success in managing my condition has given me confidence that spills over into other areas of my life. And perhaps most importantly, I've found a way to honor and continue my family's food traditions while adapting them for changing needs. I've learned that traditions don't have to be static to be meaningful. In fact, the most enduring traditions are those that can evolve while maintaining their core essence. So that's the story of how a pie saved my life, not just by being lower in sugar, but by showing me a path forward that didn't require giving up the foods that connect me to my heritage and my loved ones. Through my grandmother's wisdom, I discovered that managing diabetes doesn't have to mean a life of deprivation. It can actually lead to a richer, more nuanced appreciation of food. If you're struggling with diabetes or any other condition that's changed your relationship with food, I hope this story gives you hope. The journey isn't about giving things up. It's about finding new ways to honor what matters most about our food traditions while taking care of our health. This channel is dedicated to sharing everything I've learned from my grandmother and from my own experiments in the kitchen. We'll dive deep into specific recipes, techniques, and the science behind blood sugar-friendly desserts. But more than that, we'll explore how to maintain a joyful relationship with food while managing health conditions. If you found this story helpful, please subscribe to join our community of people who believe that health and pleasure can coexist at the table. Leave a comment sharing your own experience with diabetes and food. What traditions are you struggling to adapt? What successes have you had? And remember what my grandmother always says: life's too short for bad dessert and too precious to ignore your health. Thankfully, you don't have to choose between them. Thank you for listening to our story. I can't wait to share more of Grandma's wisdom with you in the videos to come.